probably seen headlines like this, the extinction of the human race. If you just read these headlines, you might think, oh, this is all our fault. Okay, so that's not the message of my talk. You might be surprised to hear. So what are you supposed to do about all this? So just take a deep breath. Okay. What else are we supposed to do about this? So the first thing to understand is that you shouldn't take the media literally. I'm sure that you've all read, stories in the past about medical expert systems or speech recognition systems and so on. And you realize that whenever you read a newspaper story on a subject that you're familiar with, you are pretty sure that they have no idea what they're talking about. And yet you still ascribe some degree of truth to the stories in areas that you don't know anything about. Well, that's not very self-consistent. So it's not necessarily the media's fault, right? These are things that they're not familiar with, just like we're not familiar with the internal workings of the media. It takes time, it takes a lot of repetition and careful explanation and stories and metaphors and things that ordinary people can understand, because that's what the media really want. They don't want to write nonsense. They just want us to explain things in a way that they can understand. I think we should take a lot of this not as anti-AI. So a lot of people say, oh, well, any comment about potential negative impacts of AI is anti-AI. That's really not right, any more than potential negative comments about the impact of global climate change is anti-physics. No, it's not anti-physics. It's just saying, look, there's one thing that is a result of physics that isn't good, and please could you fix this for us? Okay, and so that's the way to take it. And of course, if we had no impact on the world, if we had no potential impact on the world, they wouldn't be writing these stories. Okay, and so take this as a compliment that we're not completely irrelevant to the world. The other thing to do is don't read the arguments as they are portrayed in the media, because invariably they will take out very small quotes out of context, the most sensational and most contradictory quotes they can find, and construct some kind of story out of it. If you're interested in the subjects that I'm going to talk about, go back and read the original arguments, which are often much more carefully worded and much more sophisticated than you might see in the headlines. And the other thing to do is, if you're worried about all these negative consequences, just remember why we're doing AI in the first place, and remember that if we want to get all the good things from AI, we have to make sure that we don't produce the bad things at the same time, because people are going to get fed up if we keep producing bad things, and they're going to say, we've had enough of this stuff. So let's avoid the bad things and remember the good things. So why are we doing AI? Well, for a lot of us, it was just a cool thing to do. I was about 13 when I started doing AI. As soon as I learned what a computer was, I wanted to see if I could get it to play chess against me. I thought that would be really cool. If you find that cool and inspiring, and it's really one of the deepest questions that we can possibly work on, then it seems obvious that if you're going to try and make them intelligent, you should try and make them more intelligent. It's also the case, I think, by and large, that we believe we can succeed. So later on in the talk, I'll discuss the claim that actually we're never going to succeed. I think most of us don't believe that. If we didn't believe that, we wouldn't be doing it. And most of us, in fact, believe that what we're doing, even though we might be working on some narrow, specific problem in description, logic, complexity, or whatever, we believe that eventually this is contributing to an understanding of AI that will lead to more and more intelligent systems. And certainly when you talk to the physicists, they don't think we're going to fail. Right? They can't think of any reason why there shouldn't be arrangements of atoms that do the calculations required for intelligent behavior in a better way than neurons do. So another reason to do AI, besides the fact that it's cool, is that everything we have, everything our civilization has given us, that's taken us beyond the level of most other animals, is the result of our intelligence, not our big, strong claws and teeth, or our, scary muscles, or any of that stuff. It's our intelligence. And so if we can find ways to extend that intelligence, to amplify it, then the benefits are really unlimited. And it'll be a problem more of figuring out what we want. And the old problem of figuring out how to get it will be hopefully largely solved. I'm not saying it's not a difficult problem. It is a difficult problem to figure out what we want. But that's a better problem than not being able to have it at all. The other thing to notice is that progress is accelerating. And this is one of the reasons why the media are more interested in these topics. Because from the outside, anything that happens in the field, in your research lab, in the proceedings of IJCAI or the Artificial Intelligence Journal, is completely invisible. Okay? From the outside, this conference doesn't exist, we don't exist, nothing we write exists. Okay? What matters is stuff that gets out into the real world. And when it does, so when speech recognition makes a transition from the lab to the real world, it's like an explosion. Okay? There was nothing happening, and all of a sudden, bam, there's speech recognition. Bam, there's self-driving cars. Okay, now, journalists are quite surprised when you tell them that, the first self-driving car was 1988. And it's particularly surprising when they just talked to Ray Kurzweil, who said that in 1992 he successfully predicted the possibility of self-driving cars arriving soon. So this acceleration is real, and it's what's causing a lot of the media interest, because now machine translation is out there in the real world. It didn't exist until Google Translate was available, as far as the people in the real world are concerned. Okay. So this progress is coming because of solid theoretical foundations that I know you all learned very well. Also, I would say very large increases in computational and data resources. So in particular, these really accelerate the experimental cycle. So you can do large-scale experiments instead of requiring a year of CPU time or a huge budget. You can now do these things very quickly in a few minutes on a scale that was just unimaginable 10 years ago. So that really makes a big difference to the rate of progress of research. The speed itself doesn't make AI necessarily any better, right? So I'm definitely not saying that all of this is just the result of faster and faster computers. And when I explain this to journalists, I say, well, a faster computer just makes you get the wrong answer faster. But it really does improve the experimental cycle and raise the scale of experiments that you can do. Also, industry is now putting in huge amounts of money, as you know. If anyone has tried to hire a postdoc recently, or even hang on to their PhD students, you know that it's hard to compete against $500,000 starting salaries that industry is offering. So I would say in the last 5 years, the industry investment probably exceeds the total government investment in the history of the field. And so all of this leads to this impact on the real world. And it's the impact on the real world and the fact that that leads people to believe that future impacts are also possible that's causing a very great increase in interest from the media and making my life miserable because I have almost 600 students in my AI course next semester and so on. So it's a nice time, and it's also, let's say, an interesting time. Okay, so let's go through these three things: killer robots, the end of jobs, and the end of humanity, one after the other. So this is a Taranis drone produced by BAE Systems. So this is a drone in the standard sense that it's not autonomous, or not currently autonomous. It's supposed to be piloted by someone remotely. It has television cameras, it has missiles and bombs, and so on. But when you look at the marketing materials for this aircraft, it says explicitly that they are building on and hoping to use the technologies of full autonomy. So what does autonomous mean? So the standard definition, you can find this in current diplomatic discussions in the arms control community: weapons that can select and fire upon targets on their own without any human intervention. And the technical term is LAWS, or lethal autonomous weapons systems. The term killer robots is not a technical term. Okay, and just to make this completely clear, we are not talking about remotely piloted drones, where, as I said, humans are looking through the camera, humans are deciding where to go, what's a target, and whether to fire a missile. So this has been this issue of killer robots has been around for a while, but it's accelerating very dramatically. So I just want to give you some events that have happened in the last few years. So first of all, in 2012, the US Defense Department, realizing that there was a serious issue and that there was a slippery slope from drones to fully autonomous vehicles, actually wrote a policy which requires what's called the human in the loop. So they say that any attack requires appropriate levels of human judgment to be exercised. So that is the US policy. What exactly appropriate levels of judgment means is open to question. Some people actually claim now that that means appropriate levels of human judgment in the design of the weapon, which is not quite what most other people think that it means. And the policy explicitly allows for it to be overridden when the Secretary of Defense says so. But at least it's a policy. In 2013, April 2013, Christoph Heinz, who's the special rapporteur for extrajudicial executions and torture and a few other things, issued a report where he has studied the issue, and he recommended that there should be a treaty banning the use of these lethal autonomous weapons because they can't meet the requirements of what's called international humanitarian law, which is the law that governs killing people in warfare. That's why it's called humanitarian law. And it's encoded in various conventions called the Geneva Conventions and various protocols attached to those conventions. And the conventions require things like proportionality, so you can't kill 10 times as many civilians as you kill soldiers when you do an attack. That's what proportionality is about. And it requires discrimination. You have to be able to tell whether you're killing soldiers or civilians. So weapons that can't do that, for example landmines, have been banned already. So there is a treaty in place that bans the use of landmines because they're unable to distinguish between civilians and soldiers. In the same month, actually, there was an organization launched called the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots, and that consists of ICRAC, the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, which is an organization mainly started by roboticists, Noel Sharkey and others. Human Rights Watch, which is one of the leading human rights organizations in the world, and about 15 other organizations. The International Committee of the Red Cross supported the aims of this campaign, and so they're also in favor of a treaty to ban these weapons. And the United Nations has actually been engaging in serious discussions. So the CCW is the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. And this is where all of the non-nuclear, non-biological, non-chemical weapons treaties are discussed. So for example, there is a treaty in place to ban blinding laser weapons. So in the early 90s, the idea of blinding all your enemy soldiers was a really hot topic. And then governments realized that looking after tens of thousands of blind veterans for the rest of their lives was very expensive, and so they banned blinding laser weapons. I'm being a little bit cynical. There are other good reasons to ban blinding laser weapons, obviously. So it just goes to show that it is possible to preemptively ban a whole class of weapons before they reach widespread use. It's in fact much easier to ban them before they reach widespread use than afterwards. So at these discussions in Geneva, various attempts are being made to define what we mean by autonomous weapons, to think about verification, to maybe outline what a treaty might look like. And it's really in the balance right now. It could be that this will go nowhere, and then an arms race will undoubtedly ensue in this area. Or it could be that there'll be enough nations who see it as being in the interest of humanity to actually do something about it and build a treaty. So in January 2015 at AAAI, there was a debate between Steve Goose from Human Rights Watch and Ron Arkin from Georgia Tech on this question. And I don't want to mischaracterize Ron Arkin's position. He's not actually in favor of killer robots. And he does believe that there should be at least a moratorium on the deployment of autonomous weapon systems. But he did argue that AI researchers should make every effort to create technology that reduces the civilian casualties on the battlefield. And I think that's true regardless of whether you believe that the best way to do that is to have robots killing people. And just yesterday, we announced an open letter coming from this community. And it's signed by a very large number of people. We've actually gathered more than 10,000 signatures in the last 24 hours. And we have over 2,000 people who describe themselves as AI researchers. That includes 6 presidents of AAAI, the current and former 2 other presidents of IJCAI, the current and former presidents of the IEEE Robotics and Automation Society, and many other very distinguished figures. So some people ask, and journalists often ask, the first question is, well, are these killer robots real, right? Or is this just science fiction? And oddly enough, the arms control advocates usually begin their pieces and their speeches by saying, well, of course, these things 20 or 30 years into the future. And I think there's a misunderstanding among lay people, and we are talking about lay people, not scientists, that in order to have an autonomous weapon, you need to solve the AI problem first, and then you put the AI into the weapon, and then you have an autonomous weapon. I think most people in AI understand that, no, we don't have to solve the AI problem. We don't have to have human-level AI before we can deploy autonomous weapons. In fact, if you talk to people in robotics in particular, they say, this is trivial, right? We can basically do it now. And in fact, weapons experts, so Horowitz and Shari are 2 of the people there in Washington, D.C. So they operate a think tank called CNAS. They are experts on this area, and they keep warning people that this is going to happen much sooner than you think. And the UK Ministry of Defence put out a press release saying that these weapons are horribly feasible now. So this is not science fiction, and this is not decades away. And if nothing happens, we will start seeing videos coming back from battlefields where it shows, the video will show a robot, you know, finding, chasing down, hunting a human being and killing that human being. So let me just give you some concrete examples. So the DARPA code program, which stands for Collaborative Operations in Denied Environments. So denied environment is an environment where there is electronic jamming and you cannot communicate between the human and the robot or drone. So you can no longer have a humanly piloted drone. The drones have to become autonomous weapons. And in the description of this program, it says we want to build teams of autonomous aerial vehicles that carry out all steps of a strike mission to find, fix, track, target, engage, that means kill, and then assess, that means make sure you kill, the target. And the program manager of the code program said something perhaps he shouldn't have said, which is that he wants these systems to hunt in packs like wolves. And this was widely reported in the press back in January. So here's a little video, assuming that the video works, which sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so this is a little video from a company called KMEL, which works on drones. Just showing, imagine this is the window of your house, and here come a bunch of drones into your house. So this technology is quite advanced. These drones, as you know, with robots you can do SLAM, so they can go into your house and build a map in real time, explore the whole house. They can find human beings quite easily, so I'm sure most of you are familiar with all the pieces of technology that are already in place. It's mainly a matter of system integration to create systems that are quite capable of autonomous warfare. And the argument I made, so I was asked to address the UN in Geneva in the April meeting, and after explaining what AI was and explaining that it didn't require consciousness in order to have autonomous weapons and so on, I explained that in fact the AI parts of the problem are either in place or fairly near-term solvable problems. And the difficult part is actually going to be physics. It's the physics of building these weapons that is going to limit their capabilities. So, for example, if you want to have a very low-mass platform like the ones I just showed you, which weigh only an ounce or so, then you have a problem because a machine that weighs an ounce has a hard time killing a person that weighs 100 kilograms. So you have to think about how might they do that, because you want small size, because then you've got agility, the ability to penetrate buildings, very difficult to target tiny little robots. They're very cheap. You can dump them by the million on a city from a mothership. So they can only carry a very, very small caliber weapon. They can't fire ordinary bullets, right? They can find teeny-weeny bullets. Well, what are you going to do with teeny-weeny bullets? You're going to shoot people through the eyeballs. And if you calculate this, it's, even if a human being is moving their head rapidly and running, you can still shoot a person through the eyeball from about 30 meters away. So this would be a very effective method of disabling or killing people when you're a very small robot. You can also kill a person with about 1 gram of explosive. So not directly by blowing the person up, but actually with what's called a shaped charge. A shaped charge is where you have an explosion with a conical cavity. The conical cavity is lined with metal. And when the explosion goes off, the metal is vaporized or liquefied somewhere in the liquid vapor phase. And it shoots out at about Mach 20 and punches a hole in whatever it's next to. So it can go through steel very easily. This is 9 millimeters of steel with 1 gram of explosive, just punches a hole straight through it. So if that's your head, then you're just punching a hole straight through a person's head and then essentially vaporizing their brain with a jet of very hot, high-speed metal. So journalists love to show pictures of Terminators. But when you watch the Terminator movies, you're kind of struck by the fact that they fire an awful lot of bullets. They're very big, they're very slow, they're not very accurate. These bullets keep missing people because the people are sort of dodging out of the way, hiding behind tables. And it's like, come on guys, this is not very good AI. So I think we should think of the Terminator as not as being sort of scary science fiction, but as being kind of outdated, old-fashioned, hopelessly inefficient technology, compared to the kinds of things that really would be developed when we have an arms race in this technology. Okay, so what should you do about it? Well, you can sign the open letter, please do. That's the place to find it. tinyurl.com AW letter, that stands for Autonomous Weapons Letter. You can join the campaign at stopkillerrobots.org. If we fail to do anything about this, then just get ready to apologize to pretty much anybody you meet, because they're going to be very upset. And you should buy bulletproof glasses. Okay, on the subject of jobs, I'm actually not going to say very much because Erik Brynjolfsson gave an invited talk yesterday. I assume I was unable to attend. But this is actually something that's quite difficult for us to address. So even though this is a consequence of development of AI and robotics technologies, it's very difficult for us to address because this is not so much a research policy question. It's not as if IIII or IJCAI could have a policy that would affect economic decisions made by individual actors around the world. So if a company assembling electronic components wants to buy 1 million robots instead of hiring 2 million people, then they could do that. So the real question we have to ask, if this process is continuing, and it seems to be, and accelerating, then we have to ask what kind of economy could exist that would still provide all the benefits of work to human beings that we currently derive from employment. So it's not just financial, but also the feeling of engagement, of value, avoiding idleness, and so on. So this is a really difficult question. I happened to be at a meeting in Switzerland with a bunch of economists, a lot of people who specialize in AI and robotics, like Brynjolfsson and McAfee, but just regular economists, even people with Nobel Prizes in traditional areas of economics. They, one after the other, got up and said, this is the most important problem facing the world economy. And this was the best they could come up with. So there seems to be a failure of imagination, I would say, on the part of economists, because they think about the current structure of the economy and the logical consequences of improving AI and robotics technology, and they predict large-scale unemployment and increasing levels of economic inequality. So clearly we don't want to go in that direction. But science fiction writers are actually very good at imagining different kinds of economic structures. Many very well-known science fiction books dream up entirely different kinds of economies. And many of them wouldn't work, so it's a good idea actually to have the economists talk to the science fiction writers and explain what does and doesn't work, while the science fiction writers provide interesting ideas on which the economists can apply their methods. So this would be my recommendation for that one. Clearly, if we had better education systems for individuals, then things would come out better, particularly because it seems very likely that future jobs require greater autonomy and greater knowledge on the part of individuals, because the jobs that don't require autonomy and don't require knowledge are going to go away. So if you're in the education area, great, work on better education systems. But also I think, since it's very likely that the typical path of employment for most people, which has been to apply for a job that's advertised by a large corporation, where you become a cog in that very large machine. If those cog in a machine jobs are going away, which some people might say isn't such a bad thing, then people will need to be economically active in ways that are much more autonomous. And that requires a lot of skills that you get with an MBA program. Not everyone is going to take an MBA program. We need to take what you learn in an MBA program and provide it in the form of tools that make it easy for people to be economically active in an autonomous sense. So that enable them to be a single-person corporation and to figure out how to contribute economically, whether through the web or through their local community. Okay, so this is probably the thing that is most worrying. Certainly, it seems that if the general population believes that AI will lead to their extinction, then the general population is not likely to be well disposed towards AI. So the question is, why are people thinking this or saying this? I'm not going to single out any particular individuals who have said rash things, but I'm going to explain what's going on and what we should do about it. So, if we believe that we're going to succeed in AI, what that means is that eventually AI systems will be able to make better decisions than humans. They'll be able to take into account more information than a human being can, and they'll be able to look further into the future than we can. They'll have better models of how the world works, and so they'll be able to make better decisions. And the question is, have we thought enough about what that would mean? And this is really what's underlying these kinds of headlines. We haven't thought enough about what that would mean. And so that leaves a vacuum into which speculation flows. So I'm not talking about consciousness, I'm just talking about maximizing expected utility. Okay, this is a very simple concept, and this is the kind of AI system that's easiest to understand. A system that's maximizing expected utility and has some explicit representation of the utility function that it's maximizing that can be queried. That's a kind of system that you can have some hope of understanding how it's going to behave. Systems that are much more opaque, that merely represent policies in the form of very, very large deep learning networks, are much more difficult to understand how they're going to behave. We don't know what their goals are. They act. Implicitly, they have some goals, but they don't know what they are. We don't know what they are. So let's just look at this most transparent kind of system and understand where things could go wrong. And if you want a mental picture of this, everyone is familiar with the idea that machines can play better chess than we can. Now, chess, of course, is a small piece of the world. It's fully observable. We know the rules and so on. So I'm not saying that the world is just like chess. But just extrapolate from the idea that machines can easily beat us at chess to the idea that machines eventually will be able to easily beat us at the world. Okay? You just take the chessboard and expand that notion to the whole world. Okay? We don't want to be playing chess against machines for the world. Right? If we find ourselves in that situation, we've made a mistake somewhere along the line. So we have to avoid that future. So in my textbook, going back to '94, the first edition, there's a section called What If We Succeed? And recently with Stephen Hawking and a couple of other physicists, Max Tegmark and Frank Wilczek, you wrote an editorial in the Huffington Post about the movie Transcendence, which describes the assassination of a Berkeley AI professor. And we made this claim, which is was somewhat deliberately eye-catching claim, but I think I can back up this if you compare this to various other candidates for the biggest event in human history. It does seem likely that this might well be the biggest event in human history if and when it occurs. It's not going to be clearly not going to be a single event, but on the timescale of history, it will be a period where we go from having essentially no AI to having AI that is capable of making better decisions than humans. We wouldn't like it to be the last event in human history. Okay, so this was something we wrote in the editorial. But this is also something that I heard. So I went to Geneva for this arms control meeting, and the ambassador from China gets up and says exactly this, quoting Stephen Hawking, as he said. So this idea that there is this large event that we're moving towards has caught the imagination of the general public. And clearly the general public is expecting that we take this seriously, since it's their future. And are we thinking about this seriously? So I made a little thought experiment. What if we got an email from a superior alien civilization over in Canis Major, the constellation? That's SAC 12, Superior Alien Civilization 12. So they write to the UN. Obviously, the UN is the right place to write. They say, okay, be warned, we shall arrive in 30 to 50 years, or make it 50 to 70, or whatever your guess is about when AI, the full-scale human-level AI is going to arrive. Put that in as your time scale. So supposing we got that email, well, there would be consternation. There would be, massive panic. There would be governments figuring out. There would be convening all kinds of meetings, brainstorming, think tanks, scientists, organizations getting together, trying to figure out how are we going to deal with the arrival of this superior alien civilization. But what's actually happening with respect to, if this was the AI community, right, the aliens would just get this out-of-office auto-reply, we'll get back to you, right? that's not really worthy. That's not a worthy response to what people perceive as a very significant problem, and I think we should perceive it as a very significant issue as well. There's been a lot of non-serious stuff, and this is muddying the waters. Right? There are non-serious ways of describing what's going on, and one of them, perhaps the most pernicious, is this idea that's very pervasive that machines have an IQ and the IQ is getting bigger, and often the IQ is getting bigger because machines are getting faster. Right? This is very, very pervasive in the media, and there are lots of futurists who write exactly this way. It's incredibly misleading and unfortunate. Another very common misunderstanding is that the risk that people are talking about, this existential risk, as you might have heard that phrase, is going to come from maybe even the killer robots that I just discussed earlier, that somehow they'll decide they hate human beings, and then they'll attack us. And that's the risk that is being discussed by people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates and so on. No, I don't think Bill Gates is talking about malevolent armies of robots, but the media has this impression that this is what we're talking about. Right? So then they publish an article with pictures of Terminator robots in it. It's a very popular theme in the media these days. It's also not the case that the risk comes from spontaneous consciousness. Most of the movies about AI involve spontaneous emergence of consciousness and then all the consequences that flow, because obviously if a robot spontaneously becomes conscious, then it's going to hate human beings, and then you get these. And in fact, any mention of AI in a newspaper article of any kind is an excuse to put another Terminator robots up. So I'm kind of fed up with these Terminator robots. Okay, right, so it's none of those things. It's not malevolent, spontaneous, evil robot consciousness, and it's not machine IQ and Moore's law. So what is it? Right? What's bad about making AI better, which is what we're all trying to do? Well, what we don't want is to build AI systems that are incredibly good at making decisions for an objective that isn't the objective that we would really like them to be optimizing. Right? This is a very simple point. Okay? This is not consciousness, it's not evil, it's just we're building systems that are designed to make optimal or nearly optimal decisions about what to do. But if the objective we give them results in behavior that we don't like, that's the problem. Right? It's a very simple kind of problem. And in AI, we don't really study what the objective should be. And in statistics, in operations research, in control theory, they don't study what the objective should be. They just assume that the user specifies the objective. Right? The user supplies the goal to a planning algorithm or an NDP solver. You specify the reward function. And then the AI part is how do we make, what are the algorithms that will produce good decisions with respect to that objective. And the objective is exogenously specified. But there's a long history of examples of how this can go wrong. Right? So the Sorcerer's Apprentice is one example. King Midas, right? So he specified the objective, I want everything I touch to turn to gold. But that was the wrong objective. And he didn't like the resulting behaviors. He didn't like the fact that whenever he tried to eat or drink something, it turned to gold and he couldn't eat or drink it. So he ends up dying of starvation and thirst. He didn't like the fact that his relatives were turned to gold whenever he touched them. So he misspecified the objective, and that was the consequence. And Marvin Minsky talked about calculating digits of pi, that if you take that literally, you have to calculate as many digits of pi as you can, then you plaster the entire planet with compute servers in order to calculate more digits. Right? We don't want the planet to be plastered with compute servers, but we forgot to specify that part in the objective. Okay? And I'm sure you're all familiar with this, right? You write objectives for planning systems, and then you look at the plan that comes out and you say, oh, that's ridiculous. Okay, I guess I forgot to put something into the goal, or into the objective, or into the cost function. Nick Bostrom's book, Superintelligence, has a pretty long and extensive discussion about this. He uses paperclips as an example, and if you say to the machine, make paperclips, you have to remind the machine not to cover the entire planet with paperclips, not to go out to the asteroids to mine more materials to make more paperclips, and so on. So somebody sent me, actually a journalist, a very intelligent and well-read journalist, sent me a paper from 1960 by Norbert Wiener called Some Moral and Technical Consequences of Automation. And he makes exactly the same point, so I'll read this out. If we use, to achieve our purposes, a mechanical agency with whose operation we cannot interfere effectively, we had better be quite sure that the purpose put into the machine is the purpose which we really desire. Okay. So this point has been around for a long time. And I'll get back to Norbert Wiener's paper later on. Now, Steve Omohundro made a subsidiary but also important point that no matter what objective you give to a machine, it improves its probability of success and its degree of success by, first of all, maintaining its own existence. Right? Clearly, if the machine ceases to exist, it won't be able to achieve the goal that you give it. And so, not because it wants to preserve itself, it doesn't care about its own existence at all. It simply needs to achieve the goal. In order to achieve the goal, it needs to maintain its existence. And so the machine will naturally act as if it has a self-preservation instinct, even though it doesn't. Similarly, it will want to acquire more computational physical resources to carry out the plans needed to achieve the goal that you gave it. So these are just sub-goals, and they are automatic for almost any objective that you give to a machine. So if you combine a machine that has slightly misaligned values, so it didn't quite have the right objective function, and it necessarily preserves its own existence, it defends itself against being switched off, for example, and it acquires more resources, then you have the problem. And the problem was illustrated very well in 2001, the space Odyssey, where the machine, HAL, has been given a mission, and the mission is not the same as the one that the humans in the spaceship actually wish to be carrying out. And so they end up with a conflict. And part of what happens in the early stages of the movie, the machine plays chess against Dave, the human, and treats Dave kind of like a pet or a child. Says, Dave, your game is really improving. Right? It's pretty clear that Hal can outthink Dave, and that's how the whole plot of the movie gets set up. It's just this ability of the machine to make better decisions over a longer horizon and outthink what the humans can do. Okay, so the proposal is very simple, right? That we should change our view of what AI is from simply pure intelligence, making systems that are more intelligent, more capable of making decisions, to systems that are provably beneficial, i.e. that the objectives are designed in such a way that we like the results, and that we like the results in a provable way. This is not an easy thing to do, because provable and beneficial almost seem to be contradictory, because beneficial is a very touchy-feely, vague notion. How could you possibly prove any theorems about it? Okay, so how do we do that? Well, there have been several approaches, and I'm not going to go into any of these in great detail. So one approach is to limit the capacities of the machine. So Oracle AI is the idea that an AI system should be restricted to be purely a question-answering system, because then it's not a full-scale agent. Its actions are limited, and you can constrain it so that the questions are necessarily, and sometimes correct, either logically correct or probabilistically. They are posterior probability distributions in response to the knowledge that the system has of the query that it's given. This approach has some problems, and again, Nick Bostrom's book does a pretty good job of explaining why it's not a solution necessarily. Another approach is to, if you're going to be developing these super intelligent capabilities, they can be applied first to the problem of verification, and then only when you're sufficiently confident that your agent design is a safe one can it be deployed in the real world. So it can be used to catch all those loopholes, to understand how misalignment could result in problems, before it's too late. I've been thinking about value alignment. And value alignment, so that means getting the machine to actually understand the values of the human and be well aligned with those, can be thought of as an inverse reinforcement learning problem. So inverse reinforcement learning means that you observe the behavior of another agent, which is assumed to be rational or nearly rational, and then you infer from that behavior what value function is being optimized by that behavior. Okay? And this field has been around since the late 90s, and there are algorithms, there are theorems showing that, under circumstance blah, 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 the agent will produce behavior that approximately optimizes the value function of the human, and so on and so forth. So these are the kinds of theorems that you might actually like to obtain. So a very simple example, right? So the robot watches someone get up in the morning and sort of grope towards the kitchen and press buttons and grind up some brown round things, and then make steamy noises with another machine, and then put some liquid in their mouth and then smile and seem happy. Well, so the machine learns that part of the human objective function includes the availability of coffee in the morning. And, well, obviously you don't want the machine to want coffee. So it's not that the machine adopts the value function of the human, because that doesn't quite solve the problem, actually. That creates competition for the coffee. But instead, we want the machine to optimize the human value. By learning the human value, it can then produce actions. For example, make sure there is coffee in the fridge, make it, bring it to you in the morning, and so on. So this is something that husbands and wives do for each other. They learn each other's values and so on. So this is kind of what you want, right? So a cooperative, multi-agent kind of inverse reinforcement learning, where what you want is actually, since this is become a multi-agent problem, you want the Nash equilibria to be such that the resulting policy optimizes the value of the human. Now, initially, that value is unknown, and so there's the tricky part, right? We don't know what the value function of the human is. So if you have a very broad prior and you're a little bit risk-averse, then what the agent does at the beginning is absolutely nothing at all. Right? And this is exactly what you want. When the agent doesn't know what the human value function is, you don't want it to do anything. It should just observe and learn. And as it becomes more confident about what the human value function is, it can start to act. Okay, so it can start to rescue small children from in front of buses, but it should not get involved in debates between Israel and Palestine, for example. Right? So it should be very, very conservative and cautious in how it behaves, and mainly it's getting into a conversation with the human race about what it wants, what the human race wants from the robot in the way of help. So when you just think about this, so we can do mathematical exploration of this problem. We can work in toy worlds. There's lots of interesting research to be done. But intuitively, it seems like how bad things could be depends on a couple of things. So one is the degree to which the robot misunderstands what the human value function is. So the errors in the payoff estimate. But also the degree to which the agent is intelligent. And this is a bit more difficult to understand, but I think intuitively it seems clear that if you have a really dumb agent, it can make mistakes, but it's not smart enough to cause major disruption of the entire planet. And so intuitively it seems like the more intelligent the agent is, the more capable it is of optimizing over very long time scales and taking into account more information, it would seem like you need to have a better alignment of values with the human race. Right? And this is something that we could perhaps understand mathematically, but at the moment this is purely an intuition. So obviously this is not a straightforward problem. And the first difficulty is that humans don't behave rationally. They do things that they regret. They're inconsistent in their preferences. They're weak-willed. So they know they're supposed to do something, but they actually do something else. They're computation limited. This is a really important thing. If you see two people playing chess, well, eventually one of them is going to win and one of them is going to lose. But that doesn't mean the person who lost wanted to lose. Right? They both wanted to win, but their computational limitations caused them to choose actions which actually led to a loss on one side, or even both sides. And so we have to figure out how to deal with those issues. Obviously, people have different values, cultures have different values, so this has to be taken into account. And it's probably the case, although this is very poorly understood, that the way people act may not reflect anything to do with personal preferences at all, right? Because their behavior is partly genetically determined, and our genes are partly designed not to optimize the survival of the individual, but the survival of and proliferation of the species. And so we may act in ways that are actually personally deleterious, but beneficial to the species. So a species needs risk-averse individuals, risk-prone individuals, right? People who take ridiculous risks, because the species needs to explore and as well as exploit. And so it may be that the species needs individuals to behave in individually irrational ways that are nonetheless beneficial for the survival and proliferation of the species. So these are very complicated issues that we, as yet, understand not very much about. Okay, so why do we think this might be a good direction for research? So one is that there's a massive amount of evidence out there. So everything that people do, and every way that people respond to what other people do, this is the subject of our recorded history. Right? This is the subject of all the novels, all the movies, all the newspaper articles, all the television programs. This is what they're about. So there's a massive amount of evidence out there. And if we're proposing that intelligent systems can reach human or superhuman levels of intelligence, then they can understand this information and learn from it a pretty good model of what it is that humans care about and make sure they don't violate that. It's also the case that economically there's a very strong incentive to solve this problem long before we reach superhuman intelligence. If you want to sell domestic robots and have people use those robots in their houses, they've got to have a pretty good understanding of what humans care about, because otherwise they're going to do strange things like cook the cat for dinner because there's no food in the fridge, and well, cats need, people need meat to live, put the cat in the oven. Great. That only has to happen once for the domestic robot industry to be wiped out. So there's a very, very strong incentive to get this right long before we reach superhuman levels of intelligence. So those are two reasons why we can be optimistic about this approach. So let me just briefly go through some of the responses that are coming from within the field. So I already talked about the misunderstandings on the outside of the field. Let me talk about the responses coming from within the field. And I would say, for the most part, these responses are the result of a knee-jerk defensive reaction.